All right, welcome to another deep dive. This time we're going to be taking a look at education in the Kurdistan region of Iraq, the KRI. You sent over this really interesting blog post by Mustafa Wishar about using stories in textbooks and how that can be used to promote diversity and coexistence. And what's really interesting here is Wishar is arguing that just making small changes to educational materials, even subtle ones, can have huge ripple effects on social cohesion, which is especially important in a region like the KRI with its complex history.
Yeah, totally. It's not just about adding diversity for its own sake. It's really about grasping how powerful stories can be when it comes to learning. We learn through narratives. They shape how we see the world, and how we connect with other people.
For sure. Wishar starts his blog post off with this really powerful anecdote about the 1991 Shia uprising and how, even after that, textbooks didn't really change.
Yeah, that's a great point. He mentions that the only thing that actually changed in the textbooks was that they took out pictures of Saddam Hussein.
Hmm.
It kind of makes you wonder, though, what was the missed opportunity there? Could they have used that as a chance to introduce new narratives, promote unity, or at least acknowledge that, hey, this historical event happened and this is the impact it had?
Yeah, absolutely. It makes you think. Wishar also goes on to say that even after they updated the curriculum, like post 2003, there are still gaps.
Yeah, and those gaps have consequences. Like if education doesn't actually reflect the social and cultural realities of a place, it's not going to be very effective at creating a society that is truly inclusive and harmonious.
It's like almost like teaching kids about a world that doesn't actually exist. Which reminds me of, when you encounter something that's just completely different from your own experience. Wishar actually shares this anecdote, I think it's from his own life, where he's describing seeing the name Patros for the first time as a child. And he had never heard that name before, and he just assumed that person must be from another country.
Yeah, it just highlights how important it is to be exposed to diversity early on. It shapes how we see things. It's about expanding our understanding of what's normal instead of fearing something that's unfamiliar, being curious about it.
Yeah, exactly. And he also has this other anecdote about a kid in Erbil who's seeing a church for the first time and is just mesmerized by it. These small moments, they might seem small, but they can actually have a huge impact. They can plant those seeds of understanding and acceptance that can just, grow over time.
Absolutely, yeah. And while Wisher advocates for a broader approach to education in general, he really focuses on the power of stories in textbooks, particularly in Kurdish studies, which is interesting.
Why stories?
Well, think about how we learn. We're drawn to stories. They're engaging. They make us feel things. They help us remember stuff. Plus, they make complex ideas easier to grasp. There's even research out there that shows that stories can be really powerful tools when it comes to fostering empathy and understanding.
So it's like he's saying we should harness that power, the power of stories, to promote diversity and understanding within the KRI's educational system.
Exactly. And he actually did research on early education textbooks in the KRI, and what he found was that they really emphasized Kurdish national identity, which, okay, that makes sense. But there was very limited representation of all the other ethnic and religious groups in the region.
It's like that single narrative problem, right? It's
Right.
like reading a book where every character looks and sounds exactly the same. You miss out on all the richness and complexity of real life.
Totally. And especially in a place as diverse as the KRI. Having just that single narrative can really limit things, can actually create a sense of otherness for people who don't fit into that dominant narrative.
Right. And Wisher actually points out some really specific gaps that he found in the textbooks. Like he talks about how there's this lack of diverse names in the stories.
Oh yeah, why not include names like Ahmed or Maryam alongside the Kurdish names?
Yeah.
It's such a simple thing, but it's symbolic. It helps to normalize diversity in those stories.
Right, it makes it feel real. He also points out that there's this absence of themes that are actually related to, coexistence or accepting differences.
Which is huge because if kids aren't exposed to those ideas early on, it's a lot harder to foster that empathy and understanding later in life.
Yeah.
It's almost like, trying to teach a kid about fractions before you teach them about whole numbers.
Mm.
You got to lay the groundwork for a more inclusive worldview from the start.
Yeah, for sure. It's like building blocks. And then, of course, there's the elephant in the room, like the fact that these textbooks often leave out sensitive historical topics, like internal conflicts within the region.
And that raises a really important question, like, how do you teach history in a way that acknowledges the wrongs of the past, but also doesn't perpetuate division in the present? Ignoring them, it doesn't make them go away. In fact, it can create a whole lot of mistrust and resentment.
Yeah, it's about finding that balance between honesty and reconciliation. But okay, this is where Wishiar shifts gears, kind of goes from critique mode into solution mode.
Okay, let's hear it. What's the solution?
So his solution is to incorporate stories and imagery that actually reflect the full spectrum of diversity that exists in the region. It's not about erasing or rewriting history, it's about enriching it. It's about adding in those voices that have been historically marginalized.
And adding in the missing footnotes to history, filling in those gaps with perspectives that have been overlooked.
Hmm.
And what I really like about his approach is that it's actually very practical. It's not about overhauling the entire curriculum. It's about strategically weaving in these diverse elements into what's already there.
Small tweaks, big impact.
Exactly. It's like, when you're cooking and you add spices to a dish, you're not changing the core ingredients, but you're making it more flavorful, more complex.
I love that analogy. That's perfect. It really captures the idea, like you're keeping the core curriculum, but you're making it more inclusive and representative.
Now, I do wonder, though, some people might push back on this idea, right?
I wonder that too, yeah. What kind of challenges do you think there might be to putting Wishar's suggestions into action?
Well, for one, there might be resistance from folks who benefit from the existing power structures.
Mm-hmm.
Any attempt to bring in more diverse narratives could be seen as a threat to their dominance.
That's a good point. But Wishar does point out that the KRI government, they've actually already made some progress when it comes to promoting diversity in education. Like they've made education accessible in different languages. They've shown respect for different religious viewpoints. So they're making progress, right?
That's true, yeah. But Wishar's argument is that mainstream education needs to catch up.
Yeah.
Like imagine growing up and feeling like certain languages or customs, even certain places, are foreign to you, even though they're a part of your own community.
Yeah, feeling alienated like that can be so damaging, especially for young people who are still figuring out who they are.
Exactly. And this goes way beyond just adding a few characters from diverse backgrounds into a textbook. It's about making sure that the stories themselves reflect the real lived experiences of the diverse communities in the KRI.
I think this is a great place to take a break, and we'll pick up this conversation in part 2.
Sounds good to me. I'm already really interested to hear more about the specific ways that Wishar suggests incorporating these diverse narratives into the textbooks.
And we're back, still diving deep into this idea of using stories to promote diversity and coexistence in the KRI. All based on this blog post you sent our way.
It's a really fascinating proposal. But one thing I think often gets overlooked in these discussions is like the how. Like how do you actually go about making a change this big? You know what I mean?
Yeah, I know what you mean. And actually, Wishar has some pretty concrete ideas about that. He talks about setting up a special committee, like within the Ministry of Education.
Oh, okay. Interesting. And what would they do?
So their job would be to, recommend specific stories and images that could go in the textbooks, things that would highlight the history, the religions, even the geography of all those different communities in the KRI.
It makes sense to have like a group of people who really know their stuff, experts in both education and cultural sensitivity to kind of guide that process. You wouldn't want to just throw in random stuff without thinking about like the context and the potential impact.
Exactly. And Wishar really emphasizes that this isn't about rewriting history or pushing some kind of political agenda. It's about making those stories richer, more authentic, more accurate.
It's about adding in those missing voices and perspectives so you get a more complete and balanced picture of the region, right?
Right, yeah. And he points out that textbooks, they already get revised every so often anyway, so it's not like this would be some huge overhaul.
That's a good point. It definitely makes it seem more doable. It's like you're just weaving those elements into the regular update cycle.
He uses this really great analogy. He compares it to adding threads of different colors to a tapestry.
Oh, I like that. So you still have the original fabric, right?
Right.
But now it's way more vibrant, more detailed, more interesting to look at. Like you can still see the individual threads, but they all come together to make this richer, more nuanced whole.
Yeah, exactly. It's a perfect way to describe it. You're keeping that core curriculum, but you're also making it more representative and inclusive.
Okay, so now I'm curious. What kind of stories is he picturing? Like, does he give any specific examples of things that could be included in the textbooks?
He does, yeah. So he mentions Ankawa, which is a district in Erbil, and it's known for being super multicultural. You've got all these different languages and religions and ethnicities all coexisting there.
Right, Akawa, that's a great example. But how would you show that in a textbook, I wonder?
Well, he suggests using imagery. Like imagine a textbook showing pictures of all the different kinds of architecture in Ankara.
Oh, so like a mosque next to a church. Or maybe a Kurdish family shop right beside the Syrian bakery. Something like that.
Exactly. Just seeing that, those visuals, it could really spark a kid's curiosity, and make diversity feel normal, like just a part of everyday life.
Yeah, it's about showing kids that different ways of life can not only exist together, but actually thrive together.
He also talks about including stories about like historical figures from different communities who did important things, people who contributed to the region's development.
That's a great idea. It helps to break down those stereotypes and show that, history is made by all kinds of people, not just one group.
Yeah, it's about celebrating those shared accomplishments and highlighting the fact that all these different communities, they're all interconnected.
I'm wondering, though, like, how would teachers feel about all this? How would they respond to these changes?
That's a really good question. And I think Wishar is aware of the potential challenges there. He stresses that it's super important to provide professional development for teachers.
Yeah, of course, they would need support and training to actually do this.
Yeah.
You can't just hand them a bunch of new materials and expect them to figure it all out on their own.
Totally. They'd need the right tools and knowledge to deal with these complex and sometimes sensitive topics.
And it requires a bit of a mindset shift too, right? Like teachers would have to embrace the idea that their role is more about facilitating dialogue and critical thinking, not just like delivering information.
Yeah, they'd have to create a space where students feel comfortable asking questions and exploring different viewpoints.
Exactly. Which, that can be kind of tricky, especially in a region where education has traditionally been very focused on like memorization and rote learning.
It is a big cultural shift, for sure. But I think Wishar really believes that it's necessary if we want to build a society that's more inclusive and equitable.
He's not just advocating for changes in textbooks. He's advocating for like a whole new way of thinking about education.
Moving away from that one-size-fits-all approach and embracing all the richness and complexity of all those different learning styles and experiences.
It sounds like he's calling for a pretty big philosophical shift. But the thing is, his argument is so grounded in like practicality.
Yeah, he's not afraid to acknowledge those potential challenges, but then he also offers real solutions, a clear path forward.
He doesn't just present some like lofty ideal. He gives you an actual framework for turning that ideal into reality.
And that's what makes his ideas so compelling.
This feels like a good moment to transition to like our final thoughts.
Hmm.
We've covered a lot of ground here, but I feel like this blog post leaves us with some questions, some insights to think about.
Okay, so we're back for the final part of our deep dive into Mustafa Wishar's blog post, all about how to use stories to promote diversity and coexistence, specifically in the KRI. We've talked about so much, the power of stories, the need for those more inclusive narratives, and like the actual steps that could be taken to make this happen.
It's been really interesting for sure.
Hmm.
But I think what really sticks with me is Wishar's main message, that education can be this incredibly powerful tool for social change.
It's not just about teaching facts and figures, right? It's about shaping how people see the world, how they connect with others, how they build a society that's more just and equitable.
Yeah, totally. And he's saying that we could do this, like achieve real change by making these small but intentional changes to the way we use stories in education.
We've been focusing on how these changes would look in textbooks specifically, but I'm curious, what do you think about how this could go beyond just the classroom? Like, how could this apply to, like, the bigger picture?
That's a great question. So Wishar, he's definitely focused on formal education, but I think his ideas have implications for like all kinds of storytelling. Think about all the stories we encounter every day in books, movies, music, even on social media.
Yeah, all those stories, they shape how we understand the world around us, and they definitely influence how we feel about other people.
For sure. Like imagine a world where all those stories, they actually reflected the amazing diversity of human experiences, where different cultures and religions and viewpoints, they were just normal, celebrated even.
That would be amazing. It would be like the perfect antidote to all the prejudice and discrimination that comes from ignorance and fear of the unknown.
Totally. It's about cultivating that sense of shared humanity, recognizing that even though we're all different, we all have the same basic hopes and dreams and struggles.
It's about finding that common ground. But Wisher doesn't pretend like it's going to be easy. He's very real about the potential challenges here.
Yeah, he points out that it's going to take a real shift in mindset, not just from educators, but from like society as a whole.
We all have to be willing to examine our own biases, our own assumptions. And be open to learning from people who see things differently than we do.
It's not always comfortable, but it's so important if we want to build a world where everyone feels seen and heard and valued for who they are.
Wishar's blog post has given us a lot to think about, that's for sure.
It's a call to action, like a reminder that we all have a part to play in shaping the stories that ultimately shape our world.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with this question. What stories are you telling and what stories are you listening to?
And how are those stories affecting how you see the world and how you interact with other people?
It's something to really think about, as you go about your day. Because the power of stories to promote diversity, understanding, and coexistence, we can't underestimate that. It's huge.